Hey y'all, it's Ashley with the realm of comics, where we discuss everything that is comics, graphic novels, and manga related. So today is a little bit of a different video. I know Wednesdays I typically do my top 5 comic releases for the week, but I thought that I would deviate a little bit because this is a video that I've been meaning to get up and I haven't gotten up, and I was like, you know what, I think that we'll deviate a little bit and then I will switch over to doing this video. So as you can see from the title of this video, I'm here to talk a little bit about how you can get into reading more comics, manga, and graphic novels. Now, I'm going to go ahead from off the top and tell you that I have 2 great resources that I always use when it comes to manga, and that definitely is Shay and Izzy from Shay Geeks Out and Izzy from Happy for Now. So if you want to get into more manga, you're looking for all of the recommendations. Those are 2 people that I trust and I value their opinion when it comes to manga, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at that. My journey in reading manga started about 6 years ago, and I had heard a lot about manga. I knew a lot of kids who were in school with me who read manga. I had never tried it at that point. I had been into graphic novels and comics, but I had not picked up any manga, and so it was very intimidating for me at first, but I decided to pick up 2 random things, which ended up being Nana and Food Wars, and I just became hooked like that. I did also follow initially a content creator by the name of Laura, the Manga Hoarder, whose channel I will also link in the description box below. Such an amazing channel, such a great backlist. Laura is no longer active within the manga community or in Booktube in general, and so I just go back and watch their older videos for a point of reference in terms of like older series that I'm interested in reading, because Laura's collection was just out of this world, and I learned a lot from Laura as well when they were still a part of the community. So I'm gonna leave the tips for manga there because I'm still a newbie. I've only been reading manga for, like I said, for about 6 years, and I know that these are individuals who've been reading manga longer. They read more manga and they definitely have more experience with the medium than I do. Now, in terms of comics and graphic novels, I always get the question of like, where do I start? Like, I think people ask me like, where do I start, because of the fact that they're thinking in terms of like Marvel and DC, which is nothing wrong with that. Those are 2 of the biggest publishing houses. They're very, very well known in terms of their characters, very recognizable. And people are really interested in reading about some of those superheroes that exist within those 2 companies. But I can understand that Marvel and DC can be quite intimidating. So one of the things that I always tell people is to start by thinking about whether you want to read when it comes to comics, whether you want to pick up issues, like single issues every single week, if you're okay with just getting a glimpse of the story, just a piece of the story, not the complete story, in like 15 to 30 pages with great art, great dialogue. Not always, but for most of the series that I pick out, I typically do enjoy them. Or if you want a more complete series or complete, I guess, experience in reading, then I would recommend picking up trades. So format is going to be particularly important for definitely diving into the comic and you know, trade type of situation. I will say that if you find Marvel and DC to be too intimidating, there are other companies that publish comics outside of those 2. Some of them superhero related, some of them non-superhero related. I know a fan favorite for myself and also from Bree from the Lock Petition. We both really enjoy Image, which is really interesting because a lot of writers and artists, just creators in general from Marvel and DC, often go to Image to be able to write stories and characters that they have ownership over. If you did not know, when you write for Marvel and DC, you do not own any of the characters that you may create. So for example, James Tynion created Punchline, but Punchline is not his character to keep. It's not like he can't trademark that character or anything like that. So there are other writers that can then pick up the storyline of Punchline and kind of develop her into the character that they want, which is why you have so many different, what we call a run of a specific character. And a run is simply in reference to a writer that has done a certain ideation of a character. So for example, for Batman, you know, Tom King had his hands in it, James Tynion had his hands in it, you had Scott Snyder had his hands on Batman. This is just a bunch of people who've done Batman, but they're identified as their runs. Now runs can be short, they can be long, and then eventually a creator will kind of rotate out and no longer write that character, or they may come back and write the character, which I also find to be really fascinating. Kind of see the same thing with like Black Panther. Black Panther has been done by Reginald Hudgens. I believe that's how you say his last name. Probably saying that wrong. It's been done by Christopher Priest, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Now you have the writer of 12 Years a Slave, and it is slipping my mind, John Ridley. There we go. John Ridley is now doing his run on Black Panther. So I will say that, and I'm kind of all over the place with that, but I will say if you have a favorite writer, especially because a lot of writers who write prose are now kind of shifting into writing comics, which I think is really interesting. You can always pick out your favorite character, maybe a writer that you know, and just pick a run and read their run of said character. And that's probably the easiest way, I think, to enter some of Marvel and DC stuff. But if you're not interested, like I said in their stuff, there are other publishers, IDW, Dark Horse, you have Image, which Image is pretty much a powerhouse. You have some more smaller press companies like Scout Comics and Vault Comics that are more on the indie side, but they produce amazing stuff as well. I also would take into consideration like genre. So let's say you're not into Marvel, you're not into DC, but you just want to try something. Think about what you like when you're reading prose. Like, do you like fantasy? Do you like more contemporary slice of life? Do you like sci-fi? Do you like horror? It's really transferable in terms of picking out which you think you might like. Now, in terms of accessibility, I would say that sometimes when you're dealing with single issue comics, it's a little bit harder if you don't have a brick and mortar LCS. LCS is local comic book store or a local comic shop. If you don't have one of those, it can be a little bit more difficult to read issue by issue depending upon your resources. So it might benefit you to start looking in terms of trades, but I will say use your local library if they have the access and resources. A lot of libraries, not all libraries, are paying for the platform Hoopla. And in paying for Hoopla does have an extensive catalog of single issue comics as well as trades and hardcovers. And I don't know if Hoopla has any omnis. That is a question that I don't think I have the answer to in this moment, but I do know that they do have hardcover collections, they do have trades, and they do have single issues. So whatever your reading preference is, Hoopla is also a great resource. Now remember, it's all down to the funding of your library, what they're paying for, if they have access to Hoopla, and then also if they have the resources to pay for a certain amount of checkouts, because everybody's checkouts with Hoopla are definitely not the same. I would also say that there is a wide range of comics for everyone in terms of age category. They are starting to really push some stuff for younger audiences and to get younger kids into reading comics. Now shifting over into what they're doing also in terms of graphic novels. So when you talk to people about the difference between comics and graphic novels, people's definitions are going to vary. For me, a comic is something that is serialized, and some people look at trades as graphic novels because even though it's not the complete story, it is an arc of the story that is somewhat in completion. So some people consider those to be graphic novels. I don't. When I think about graphic novels, I think middle, beginning, and ending. And it's a complete story, but sometimes there are graphic novel series that have more than just one volume. And often I think about it, I define it in the terms of whether the series has been serialized or not. And if it's been serialized, I always refer to it as a comic. If it wasn't serialized, 9 times out of 10, I refer to it as a graphic novel. And honestly, it's probably a very muddled It's probably a very muddled description of the difference between the two, but the more accustomed you begin to get with serialized versus not serialized, you'll start to get a grasp of all this terminology. Now, if you're more into graphic novels as opposed to, you know, delving into the world of comics, that's Marvel, DC, Image, whatever, I definitely would recommend, once again, using that kind of genre as a point of reference. Like, there's a lot of nonfiction graphic memoirs that are great. In terms of age category, they're doing a lot of great things for middle grade and YA readers, especially even for DC and Marvel. So even if you're not a DC and Marvel person in terms of the adult stuff, they are creating new origin or retelling origin stories for some DC and Marvel characters, making them more accessible for younger reader audiences. That probably made no sense, but I always say that just because something is targeted at a certain age demographic doesn't mean that you can't read it. And sometimes I find that shifting or starting within the framework of a younger target audience can be more accessible than jumping in and stuff that's considered more adult material, because the complexity behind it just gets to be too much, especially when you think about the worlds that exist in bigger publishers like Marvel and DC. I also think that when it comes to middle grade and children's graphic novels, they tend to cover a lot of great things thematically. I just read one the other day called Smaller Sister, which really discussed the dynamics not only between siblings, but also it delved heavily into eating disorders and how it not only impacts the person that has the eating disorder, but also family members that are present during that time. That was a great one. It had a lot of great themes to it. Some of them are just like really, really fun, but I find such a wide variety when it comes to middle grade and children's graphic novels that I always try to encourage people to check them out, because there's amazing things that are being done by First Second, Omni Press. They're all, even Random House has their own kind of like imprint that does graphic novels. HarperCollins also has their own, I believe, as well, that kind of pushes out YA graphic novels. So there's a lot of smaller presses to definitely check out. I will say, going back to the comics, you have like Kaboom, which is also a great resource if you're looking for comics for a younger audience. They typically publish things that are specifically for kids. If you are looking for other ways, like I said, outside, which I should have included when I was talking about not having necessarily a brick and mortar store to go to, in addition to Hoopla, some libraries do purchase manga graphic novels and comics for their Libby users. So I would also check out Libby. I would see what is in stock in terms of what your library has and possibly request. If there's something that you want that they don't necessarily have, that's always a good option. But also different things like Comixology and Kindle Unlimited. These are for individuals who may have some extra funds where you're able to pay for a monthly subscription. Kindle Unlimited has a great variety of comics and graphic novels and manga that you can read. And of course, I think it's like $9.99 per month, but there's ways to finesse that, especially during the holiday times. They do stuff where you have like 3 months of Kindle Unlimited for 99 cents. I would definitely, if you can, look for deals like that to jump in. And then there's a lot of stuff on KU. Comixology is another additional resource where they have a lot of Comixology Unlimited things that are not necessarily accessible through KU. And then when you have a Comixology subscription, you do get a discount for digital purchases. So those are all really, really great resources. I think it simply is just about following people on social media that read a lot of comics and graphic novels. It's looking for recommendation lists. If you just Google, graphic novels, comics for beginners, there are hundreds of lists out there that exist where they give you like the 100 greatest graphic novels of all time. Some of that stuff is you know, slightly dated. It is of its time, but they are great works of art, and those are also good places to start. And once you get your footing, you will start to just kind of get an idea of what you like, certain art styles that you like. Do you like palettes that are more muted, and do you like a lot of action scenes, or do you like things that are more like vibrant and colorful and more lighthearted? So you will eventually find what works best for you. I think it's just taking that initial leap that can be very intimidating for people, because it's not, I know manga is definitely blowing up in terms of how mainstream it's becoming. And I'm not saying that comics and graphic novels aren't as mainstream, but I think because of the complexity in the worlds that can exist when you think about it in terms of Marvel and DC, that kind of stops people from wanting to dive into it, because I think everything is like Marvel and DC, and it's really not. There are publishers who do amazing things with comics and graphic novels that have nothing to do with the complexity of the world building and interconnectedness that exists in Marvel and DC. But I think that's usually the hiccup there, and people are like, I don't even know where to start, where to begin. And honestly, like, I keep going back to that genre thing, because that's going to be key for a lot of people. Like, if you're traditionally someone who reads a lot of romance, your first instinct is not going to want to be probably to pick up something that is, you know, a horror graphic novel comic. I mean, you may want to, but if that's a genre that you definitely cling to, I think that it would be good to find something that's more contemporary, more slice of life, because it will align with what you have a preference for in terms of your reading taste to begin with. And then once you get a feel for it, you can start to expand what you're looking for. I have a recommendation list already, which I need to be doing some more, which I will be doing some more. I will have one that's going to focus on middle grade graphic novel recommendations, because I think that those can be kind of slept on in our community. This is not really, it's kind of weird because the channel is not technically like a booktube channel, but a lot of people who are watching are part of the booktube community. So I think that that's one area that's kind of slept on, and I want people to experience more middle grade graphic novels because they are absolutely amazing and I adore them. But I do have a recommendation video myself, which I will leave in the card symbol above for you to check out, so you can kind of get your footing on maybe some stuff that probably will align with your reading taste when it comes to prose. But for me, honestly, like, the only thing I could take is just go for it, jump in. And I will provide you with a couple of resources in the description box below, a couple of people that I follow in terms of like website wise. I'll link every creator that I mentioned down in the description box below, but there are a couple of websites that I follow for like reading orders and reading guides and recommendations that I think would be great for y'all to check out. And I would say just pick one or two, see what you like, and then just kind of follow that path and that pattern. And it takes a lot of experimentation to figure out what you're into, what you're not into, what type of art you like, what type of storytelling you're like. I think the one piece of advice that I always give to people who are jumping into graphic novels and comics is that, and also manga, is that don't go in expecting the same thing that you get from prose. These are works of art. Not saying that prose isn't a work of art, but I mean visual art. So the artwork is leading the story. I think sometimes people go into comics and graphic novels and even manga and they're anticipating having all of this text. Well, overwriting can actually destroy the experience of reading a comic graphic novel, even manga. Some manga are text heavy and it's like, oh gosh. And it's like, it's amazing how it can be text heavy and it's annoying, but you can read a 500-page book because it's a different experience. The art is what's leading the story. The text is actually what's supposed to be following it. And that's why a lot of authors have difficulties transitioning. If they traditionally write prose, transitioning to comics is a completely different thing. You have to be mindful not to overwrite because you can take away from the experience. So that's also a key piece of advice that I would give you. If you go in expecting any comic, graphic novel, or manga to be the same as a prose book, you're going to be disappointed. You have to get in with the flow of the art leading and the text following, which can be kind of difficult in terms of training your brain to realize that. And eventually you will get it. But I would say pick one or two titles, dive in, see what you like, do a taste test, And then once you find writers that you like, you're going to notice if there's illustrators that you cling to, you will start to seek out more of their work. And then you'll find people who kind of, you know, write in a similar fashion, or you may find somebody that writes in a new way that you really enjoy. And eventually you will branch out and you will kind of curate your own experience when it comes to reading comics, graphic novels, and manga. But I definitely will link those resources down in the description box below. I'll make sure that I link all of the content creators down that I mentioned. If you have any questions, if you need any more tips or guidance, please let me know in the comment box below. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications, and I will be back with another video soon.